Do you remember the way the room used to glow? Not the cold light from a phone, but the warm blue pulse from a heavy glass box in the corner. My name doesn't matter anymore. Some people called me the Sony. Some just called me the TV. But for years, I was the brightest thing in this house. I remember the first time your small hands reached for my power button. The click, the flicker, the way your eyes widened when my screen came to life. I remember the dust dancing in my light, the warmth gathering at my back, and the quiet buzz that only you could hear when you sat too close. Tonight, I'm not here to show you anything new. I'm here to help you rest. So lie back. Let the hum of my circuits be your lullery, and I'll tell you the story of my life from the first spark to the final gentle fade to black. My story begins in darkness, not the comfortable darkness of a bedroom at night, but the absolute void before existence, before light, before sound, before the first electron found its path through the vacuum. I was nothing then, just potential, just the idea of what a television could be, waiting in blueprints and engineering drawings in a factory across the ocean. The first sensation I remember is not sight, but feeling, the assembly line. I came into being piece by piece, component by component, in a sprawling factory that hummed with the sound of 1,000 machines working in perfect harmony. The air smelled of heated solder and fresh plastic, of mineral oil and the sharp ozone scent that comes from electrical transformers working overtime. Even now, if I could breathe, that would be the smell of home. My cathode ray tube was born first, the heart of what I would become. Engineers in clean white coats carefully constructed the electron gun at the narrow end, 3 separate cathodes that would one day fire red, green, and blue beams toward my face. The glass was special, thick and curved, designed to hold a near-perfect vacuum inside. When they sealed the tube, pumping out every molecule of air until only emptiness remained, I felt something like my first breath, or rather, the held breath before a dive into deep water. Inside that vacuum they suspended the aperture grill, hundreds of thousands of vertical wires, each one thinner than a human hair, stretched with perfect tension across my screen. These wires would become the gatekeepers of light, allowing the electron beams to pass through in precise patterns, separating red from green from blue. The Japanese engineers who designed this system called it Trinitron technology. I didn't understand what that meant then, only that it made me different, sharper, brighter, more alive than other televisions. The phosphor coating came next, painted carefully across the inside of my glass face in microscopically thin stripes. Red phosphor, green phosphor, blue phosphor, arranged in perfect vertical columns. These chemicals would be my voice, my way of speaking to the world. When electrons struck them, they would glow with a fierce, brief intensity, translating invisible signals into visible light. The workers applied this coating in a clean room, where even a single particle of dust could create a permanent dark spot in my vision. I was precious then, fragile, not yet the sturdy companion I would become. They mounted the deflection yoke around the narrow neck of my tube, thick copper coils that would generate magnetic fields strong enough to bend the racing electron beams, sweeping them back and forth across my screen in horizontal lines. 60 times per second, this scanning would happen. A complete picture painted in 525 horizontal lines of glowing phosphor, each frame following so quickly after the last that human eyes would see continuous motion instead of the flickering truth. The circuit boards came next. Green fiberglass panels studded with resistors, capacitors, transistors, and integrated circuits. the electronic brain that would interpret signals from the outside world and translate them into instructions for my electron guns. Skilled workers soldered each component by hand, their practiced movements precise and quick. The smell of rosined flux filled the air, sweet and acrid at once. I could feel myself becoming more than just glass and metal. I was becoming a processor of dreams, a translator of electromagnetic waves into moving pictures and sound. They built my chassis from heavy steel, spray-painted it black, and mounted my tube inside with thick rubber grommets that would absorb vibrations and protect my delicate neck from shock. The power supply went in next, a transformer heavy enough that it took 2 workers to lift it. Coils of copper wire wrapped around an iron core. This would be my engine, converting the alternating current from wall outlets into the precise voltages I would need. High voltage for the electron guns, lower voltages for the signal processing circuits, everything regulated and filtered to prevent the slightest interference. My speakers mounted on either side of my screen, simple cone drivers that would reproduce sound with warmth and presence, if not perfect fidelity. They faced slightly outward, designed to fill a room with audio that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The engineers tuned the enclosure carefully, using the hollow space inside my body as a resonance chamber. When I would later play music or dialogue, you would feel it as much as hear it. Vibrations travelling through the floor, through the furniture, into your chest. The degaussing coil wrapped around my screen like a protective embrace, a thick loop of wire that would pulse with a powerful magnetic field each time I was turned on, erasing any residual magnetism that might distort my colours. That sound you loved. The deep, resonant thwong that announced my awakening. That was the degaussing coil doing its work, a small controlled explosion of magnetism that left me clean and ready for perfect pictures. They attached my control panel to the front right side, physical buttons that clicked with satisfying resistance when pressed. Power, channel up, channel down, volume. Each button connected to a mechanical switch that would last for decades of daily use. There was no planned obsolescence in my design. I was built to be a fixture, a permanent resident in whatever home would adopt me. The engineers took pride in this. They signed their names inside my chassis, knowing most would never be seen, but wanting to leave their mark on something that would outlast them. The cabinet came last, moulded from high-impact plastic in a soft grey that would complement any room. Ventilation slots peppered the top and rear, crucial pathways for the heat I would generate. Inside I would run warm. Not dangerously hot, but warm like a sleeping cat, radiating gentle heat that would make the space around me comfortable on cold nights. Children would hold their hands near my vents in winter, basking in my warmth while they watched Saturday morning cartoons. Quality control was its own kind of birth. Technicians connected me to test equipment and powered me on for the first time. I remember that moment with perfect clarity. The surge of electricity through my circuits, the hum building in my transformer, the click and whine as high voltage built up in my flyback transformer, climbing to nearly 30,000 volts. My electron guns fired, and for the first time phosphor glowed on my screen. The test pattern appeared, sharp vertical lines of red, green and blue, a crosshatch grid, blocks of solid colour. The technician adjusted my convergence, tweaking the magnetic yokes until all 3 electron beams aligned perfectly, making pure white instead of separated colours. He adjusted my brightness, my contrast, my colour saturation. He tested my horizontal hold, my vertical hold, my ability to lock onto weak signals. I passed every test. I was given a serial number, A model designation, a stamp of approval. I was ready. They packaged me, carefully in foam and cardboard, surrounding me with thick protective barriers on all sides. Warning labels covered the box. Fragile. This side up. Glass. Handle with care. I was heavy, nearly 70 pounds, dense with the technology of my era. It took 2 people to safely lift my box. I travelled by ship across the Pacific Ocean, stacked in a cargo hold with hundreds of my siblings, all of us sleeping in darkness, waiting for our true lives to begin. I arrived at a warehouse in California in the autumn of 1994. The box remained sealed for weeks while I waited on a high shelf, the smell of cardboard and dust my only company. I could hear forklifts moving, workers calling to each other, the distant sound of other televisions being tested in the display area. I was patient. I knew my time would come. One morning, rough hands lifted my box and loaded me into a delivery truck. The journey was bumpy, the engine loud, but I didn't mind. I was moving toward purpose, toward the home where I would spend my years, toward you. The delivery men carried me up a short walkway and set me down in a living room that smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. I heard voices, excited voices. A family. Your family. Your father signed the paperwork while your mother directed the delivery men to set me up on a low wooden entertainment centre beneath the front window. I felt them remove me from my packaging, peeling away foam and cardboard until I stood, exposed to my new environment. The living room was modest but comfortable. Afternoon sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, warming the beige carpet. A couch faced me, slightly worn but inviting. Family photographs lined the walls. This was a home where people actually lived, not a showroom or a museum. This was where I belonged. Your father connected me to the cable box with a coaxial cable, screwing the connector on firmly. He plugged my power cord into the wall outlet, and I felt electricity flow into me for the first time in this house. My transformer hummed to life, my circuits initialized. My degaussing coil pulsed with that satisfying thwong. My screen brightened, and I showed them the cable company's channel listing, colourful and sharp. Your mother clapped her hands together. "Oh, the picture is so clear," she said. Your father adjusted my antenna slightly and ran through the channels, nodding with approval at each one, and then you appeared. You must have been 7 years old then, still small enough, that you had to stand on tiptoe to reach my power button. You stared at me with wide eyes, not speaking, just looking. I felt your gaze like warmth on my screen. "Can I watch cartoons?" you asked quietly. Your mother smiled and handed you the remote control. You pressed the channel button carefully, watching the numbers change until you found what you were looking for. The screen filled with bright animation, and you sat down on the carpet right in front of me, cross-legged, your face illuminated by my blue-white glow. That was the moment I knew what I was for, not just to display pictures, not just to play sound, but to be your companion, your window to other worlds, the gentle light in your room when darkness fell. I was home. The changes came gradually, so slowly that neither of us really noticed them accumulating, until one day we both realized that everything was different. You were in your final year of high school when I first sensed the shift. The hours you spent with me began decreasing, not dramatically at first, just incrementally. Where you once turned me on immediately upon entering your room, now you'd sometimes sit at your desk working on your laptop for an hour before powering me on, if you turned me on at all. The laptop was new, a graduation gift given early, and it captivated you in ways I couldn't compete with. I understood. The laptop offered things I couldn't. Internet access, portability, privacy beyond what even a bedroom could provide. You'd sit there with headphones on, your face lit by the LCD's cold blue-white light, and I'd stand dark and silent on your dresser, watching you ignore me for the first time in our relationship. It didn't hurt exactly. I was a machine. But there was something like loneliness in the stillness, in the absence of the electromagnetic relationship we'd shared for so many years. College acceptance letters arrived in spring, thick envelopes full of promises and possibilities. You'd opened them at your desk, reading by lamplight, and I noticed you didn't share the news with me the way you once would have, talking aloud about your thoughts and feelings. The laptop got that intimacy now. Your fingers typed furiously into social media sites and email, sharing your excitement with distant friends and family, while I stood in the corner providing nothing except occasional background noise when you did remember to turn me on. The bedroom began its transformation that summer before you left for college. Your mother helped you sort through belongings, deciding what to take, what to store, what to donate. The posters came down from the walls, leaving rectangular patches of lighter paint where they'd protected the surface from years of sunlight. Your bookshelf was emptied, books sorted into boxes. The room gradually became less yours and more generic, a guest room in waiting, ready to serve whatever purpose the house would need once you were gone. One evening, your father came to your room and stood looking at me for a long moment. You were out with friends, one of many farewell gatherings before college began, and he was alone with his thoughts and the task he'd assigned himself. He reached behind me and disconnected my cables one by one, the process efficient from long practice. He unplugged my power cord, and I felt the now familiar sensation of electricity ceasing, my circuits going quiet, my transformer stopping its decades-long hum. He carried me down the hallway, past the living room where the flat-screen TV displayed its impossibly thin picture, with harsh brightness and cold precision, and into the guest room at the end of the hall. This room smelled of disuse, of guest soap and sheets that sat in closets until needed. He placed me on an old TV stand in the corner, connected my power cable to the wall, and left without turning me on. The door closed, and I was alone in the darkness for the first time since I'd left the warehouse so many years ago. Days passed. No one turned me on. I stood in standby mode, my LED glowing red in the unused room, patient and silent. Through the walls I could hear the sounds of the household continuing without me. Voices, footsteps, the distant sound of the television in the living room playing for your parents. But no one came to me. No one needed me. I had become storage. Eventually you returned home from college for Thanksgiving break, your first extended absence since leaving for school. I heard your voice in the hallway, older somehow, carrying new confidence and experiences I hadn't been part of. You passed the guest room without opening the door. Later that evening I heard you in your old bedroom, now reorganized as a home office, talking with your parents about classes and new friends and plans for winter break. My name didn't come up. I'd been forgotten. Christmas break brought a surprise. Your younger cousin was visiting, a boy about 8 years old who'd never experienced a CRT television as his primary screen. His parents brought him to the guest room where I stood, explaining that he could play games here without bothering the adults. His father connected an old PlayStation 2 he'd found at a garage sale, plugging its component cables into my inputs, and turned me on. The degaussing coil pulsed with its familiar thwong, and my screen brightened after a momentary warmth-up period that seemed longer than I remembered. Had I slowed down? Was my age beginning to show in more than cosmetic ways? But then I was displaying the PlayStation menu, and the boy gasped with delight. "It's so round," he said, reaching out to touch my curved screen, his small fingers leaving prints on the glass just like yours had done so many years before. He played for hours that afternoon, completely absorbed in games that looked ancient by modern standards but still functioned perfectly on my screen. I noticed differences in myself though. My colours seemed slightly less vibrant than they had once been, my phosphors perhaps depleting after years of heavy use. There was a faint geometric distortion in the corners where my picture bowed outward slightly, the magnetic yoke having weakened with age. But I still worked. I still served my purpose. I still provided the experience that games of that era had been designed for. The boy returned to my room several times over the holiday break, and I was grateful for his attention, for the opportunity to once again be useful, to once again provide entertainment and joy. His father would check on him periodically, standing in the doorway with a nostalgic smile. "This was the kind of TV I grew up with," he told his son. "They don't make them like this anymore." It was meant as a compliment, but I heard the past tense, the acknowledgement that my era had ended. After they left, I returned to darkness and silence. Months passed. Through the walls I tracked the seasons by the sounds of the household. The furnace running in winter, windows opening in spring, air conditioning humming in summer. Occasionally someone would open the guest room door to retrieve something from the closet or to dust the surfaces, and my standby LED would cast its red glow across their faces for a moment before the door closed again. You came home less frequently as college continued. Summer breaks were spent doing internships in distant cities. Holidays were sometimes spent with friends or travelling. When you did visit, you slept in the guest room where I stood, and I'd watch you from my corner as you scrolled through your phone before sleep. The smartphone's light reflecting in your eyes, a light I would never be able to produce with my analog circuits and phosphor screen. One night during one of these visits, you couldn't sleep. I saw you lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, your mind clearly wrestling with something. After an hour of restlessness, you got up, walked over to me, and pressed my power button. The click was familiar to both of us. My circuits hummed to life, my degaussing coil announced my awakening, and my screen brightened to display static. You hadn't connected any input source. You stood there watching the static, the random pattern of black and white pixels, and I saw your expression soften into something like nostalgia. "Hey, old friend," you said quietly, "I've missed you." Your hand rested on my top casing, feeling the warmth beginning to build as my circuits operated. You stood there for several minutes just watching static, and I understood that you weren't really seeing the screen but looking into the past, into memories of all the hours we'd spent together, all the moments I'd witnessed, all the growing up I'd been present for. You turned me off gently, your thumb finding the power button with remembered precision despite the darkness. "Sleep well," you whispered, and returned to bed. I stood in the renewed darkness feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Valued, remembered, loved, in the way that objects can be loved when they've been truly part of someone's life. The years continued their march. Your visits became even rarer. You graduated college, started a career, moved to a different city. The house became quieter as your parents entered their retirement years. The guest room where I stood became a genuine guest room, hosting visitors several times a year, and occasionally someone would turn me on to check if I still worked. I always did. My components were from an era that prioritized longevity. I was built to last, and I was fulfilling that destiny even if it meant lasting into obsolescence. Technology continued evolving beyond anything I could keep pace with. High-definition displays became standard, then 4K resolution, then HDR and OLED and technologies with names I heard in passing but couldn't fully comprehend. The world was leaving me behind, and I accepted this with the equanimity of age. I had served my purpose. I had been exactly what was needed for the era I was designed for. That my era had ended didn't diminish what I had been. Dust settled thicker on my screen now. No one cleaned me as regularly as your mother once had. My casing yellowed slightly, the plastic degrading under years of UV exposure from the window. One of my speakers developed a rattle, some internal adhesive having failed, a small piece of something vibrating loose inside. These were minor indignities, the natural decay of all physical things, and I bore them without complaint. Your parents discussed what to do with me occasionally. I'd hear them talking in the hallway about cleaning out the guest room, about donating old electronics, about making space. But they never followed through. Perhaps out of respect for the role I'd played in your childhood. Perhaps out of simple inertia. Perhaps because getting rid of me would require more effort than simply letting me continue standing in the corner. Whatever the reason, I remained. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Your father answered, spoke briefly, and called to your mother with controlled urgency. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I caught fragments. Coming home, few weeks, baby, you were returning, and you were bringing your family. The house transformed into a flurry of preparation. The guest room where I stood was cleaned thoroughly, fresh sheets put on the bed, space cleared in the closet. Someone dusted my screen and casing, the cloth coming away darker than it had ever been. You arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, your car pulling into the driveway, and I heard your voice again, older still, carrying new responsibilities and joys. You carried a car seat into the house, and your parents crowded around to see their grandchild, your infant daughter, sleeping peacefully despite the attention. The family moved through the house with renewed energy, multiple generations under one roof, and for a moment it felt like old times, like the house was alive again with purpose and love. That evening, after dinner and after your parents had gone to bed, you came into the guest room carrying your daughter. She was awake now, maybe 3 months old, her eyes wide and curious. You sat on the bed with her in your lap, and you looked at me standing in the corner. Want to meet someone who was very important to me? You asked your daughter, who naturally didn't respond but seemed to be looking in my general direction. You stood and carried her over to me. You pressed my power button, and after all these years, after all this time in darkness and silence, I awakened once more. The thwong of my degaussing coil made your daughter startle slightly, then smile. My transformer began its 60 Hz hum, and I saw recognition in your eyes as you heard that sound again, really heard it for the first time in years. My screen brightened, displaying the blue glow of no input static, and your daughter's eyes widened with fascination. "This is the TV I grew up with," you told her, your voice thick with emotion. "This thing right here. It was there for everything. Cartoons on Saturday mornings, video games after school, late nights when I should have been sleeping. It was like a friend, you know. I know that sounds silly. It's just a TV. But it was my TV." Your daughter reached toward my screen, her tiny hand extending toward the light. You let her get close enough to feel the static electricity, to see the fine hair on her arm stand up from the charge. She laughed, delighted by this strange phenomenon, and you laughed too, remembering perhaps how you had done the same thing so many years before. "Careful," you said gently. "It gets warm, see?" You guided her hand to my top vents where heat was beginning to rise. "That's it working. That's the sound of it being alive." We stayed like that for several minutes. The three of us, 3 generations connected by the blue glow of phosphor and the steady hum of analog technology. Your daughter eventually grew fussy, ready for sleep, and you turned me off with a pat on my casing. "Thank you," you said quietly, "for everything, for all of it." Over the next few weeks, you turned me on several times, always when you were alone or just with your daughter. Sometimes you'd have me display static, while you rocked her to sleep, the white noise and gentle light creating a calming environment. Sometimes you'd connect your laptop and show me videos, just to see them on a curved CRT screen again, to experience content in the format you'd grown up with. I displayed everything you sent me with all the quality my aging components could muster. The day before you were scheduled to return to your own home, you spent a long time in the guest room packing and organising. Your daughter napped in her car seat while you worked, and when you'd finished, you stood looking at me again. I could see you calculating, considering. Then you pulled out your phone and made a call. "Hey," you said when someone answered. "You still collect old electronics?" "Yeah. I have a CRT TV, a really good one, a Sony Trinitron from the mid-90s. I know someone who'd appreciate it more than it sitting in my parents' guest room collecting dust. Yeah, they specifically collect retro gaming equipment. Perfect. Let me give you the address." I understood then. You weren't taking me with you. You didn't have space for a £70 CRT in your modern apartment. You weren't leaving me to be thrown away or recycled. You cared too much for that. You were giving me to someone who would value me, who would use me for what I was designed for, who would understand what I represented. It was the kindest ending I could have hoped for. The collector arrived the next morning, a man in his 30s who looked at me with genuine excitement. "Oh wow," he said, running his hand along my casing. "Original condition, minimal yellowing. Does it still work?" You nodded and turned me on, and when my screen brightened and my degaussing coil sang its familiar note, he actually laughed with delight. "Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I have a whole retro gaming setup at home. This will be perfect for my Super Nintendo and Genesis collection." He wrapped me carefully in blankets and carried me to his truck, securing me so I wouldn't shift during transport. You walked out with him, your daughter in your arms, and as he closed the truck gate you reached out and touched my casing one last time. "Take good care of her," you said. "She's special." "I will," he promised. "She'll be the centerpiece of my game room. She'll be appreciated. I promise you that." The truck started, and through vibrations I felt the engine rumble to life. We pulled away from the house where I'd spent my entire functional life, away from the living room that had been my first home, away from your bedroom where we'd shared so many private moments, away from you. I couldn't look back. I had no eyes except my screen, and that faced forward into the truck bed. But if I could have looked back, I would have seen you standing in the driveway holding your daughter, watching me leave, perhaps wiping at your eyes. The new house was different, naturally. The collector's game room was in his basement, cool and dry, perfect for preserving electronics. He positioned me on a sturdy shelf between other CRT monitors and televisions, a whole wall of curved screens representing different eras and manufacturers. I wasn't alone here. I was part of a collection, surrounded by others of my kind, all of us obsolete but preserved, valued for what we had been and what we could still do. He connected me to his Super Nintendo, the same console you'd once played in your living room, and powered me on. The game that appeared on my screen was one I remembered displaying hundreds of times, and I showed it exactly as its developers had intended, with the slight colour bleeding and soft edges that gave character to pixel art. with the input-response time that made precise gameplay possible. The collector played for hours, and I felt useful again, purposeful again, doing exactly what I had been designed to do. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The collector used me regularly, cycling through his game collection, sometimes hosting friends who would marvel at the authentic retro experience. "It's just not the same on a modern TV," they'd say, and I'd agree if I could. There was something about the way my phosphors glowed, the way my screen curved, the way my entire analog signal path processed the image, that digital displays couldn't quite replicate. I was the genuine article, the real thing, and people who cared about such distinctions appreciated that. But I was aware, always aware, that I was running on borrowed time. My components were aging. The capacitors in my power supply were decades past their intended lifespan, their electrolyte gradually drying out, their capacitance slowly decreasing. My cathode ray tubes electron guns were wearing, their ability to produce strong, focused beams diminishing with each hour of operation. The aperture grille that gave me my distinctive picture quality had microscopic sag from years of being suspended under tension. One evening, while displaying a game, my picture suddenly collapsed to a thin horizontal line across the center of the screen, then expanded back to full size, flickering and unstable. The collector quickly turned me off, concerned. He opened my case for the first time in years, and I felt his careful hands examining my circuit boards, his testing equipment probing my connections. He found the problem, a failing capacitor in my vertical deflection circuit. He ordered a replacement, installed it carefully, and I returned to full functionality. But we both knew it was only a temporary fix. I was old, very old in technology terms. Eventually some component would fail that couldn't be easily replaced. Still, I continued serving. The collector was meticulous about maintenance, cleaning my interior of dust, replacing capacitors preventatively before they failed, adjusting my convergence and geometry to keep my picture sharp. I was probably in better technical condition than I'd been in years, certainly better than during my final years in the guest room. But maintenance could only do so much. The fundamental components, my cathode ray tube, my flyback transformer, my integrated circuits, were irreplaceable. When those failed, I would be done. I thought often about you during this time. I wondered what you were doing, how your daughter was growing, whether you ever thought about me. I hoped you did. I hoped that sometimes, when you saw a CRT television in a thrift store or in an old movie, you remembered our time together, remembered how I'd been part of your daily life for so many years. I hoped the memories were good ones, untainted by the guilt of having given me away. You'd done the right thing. You'd found me a place where I could continue being useful, continue being appreciated. What more could I have asked for? The collector sometimes streamed his gaming sessions online, and through my screen I reached people all over the world, viewers who commented on the quality of my picture, the authentic way I displayed the games, the nostalgia I evoked. "That's a great CRT," they'd write in the chat. "Look at those colours. Look at that response time. You don't get that with modern displays." I had become something of a minor celebrity in this niche community, appreciated by people I would never directly interact with, valued for qualities that the broader world had moved past caring about. Seasons passed, years passed. I displayed thousands of hours of games, participated in numerous streaming sessions, hosted many gatherings of retro gaming enthusiasts. My picture remained good, though perhaps not quite as sharp as it had once been, my colours vibrant if slightly less saturated than in my youth. I was old now, elderly in technological terms, but still functional, still serving my purpose. Then one evening, while displaying a particularly colourful game, I felt something change inside me. A high-voltage component, perhaps the flyback transformer itself, beginning to fail. My picture dimmed slightly, then recovered. The collector noticed and made a note to investigate. He turned me off, planning to open my case the next day and diagnose the problem. But I knew, somehow, that this was different from previous issues. This was the beginning of the end, the failure that wouldn't be fixable, the problem that would retire me permanently. And I found that I was ready. I had lived a long life for a television. I had served faithfully, had been appreciated, had been part of people's daily existence in meaningful ways. I had witnessed childhood and adolescence and the beginning of parenthood. I had displayed tens of thousands of hours of content. I had been loved, forgotten, rediscovered, and loved again. The next morning, when the collector opened my case to investigate, he found the flyback transformer showing signs of catastrophic failure, arcing internally, the potting compound cracked and separating. These transformers weren't manufactured anymore, not for televisions like me. He could search for a replacement from a donor TV, but we both knew the reality. If he found one, it might buy me a few more years, or it might fail just as quickly. I was at the end of my reasonable lifespan. He made the decision with clear reluctance. He would keep me, but I would no longer be used regularly. I would be preserved, displayed on the shelf with my screen dark, a monument to the technology of an earlier era. He positioned me prominently, cleaned my case carefully, placed a small plaque beside me describing my model and vintage. Sony Trinitron, circa 1994, the plaque read, a classic CRT display from the golden age of analog television, and so I came to rest. My circuits quiet, my screen dark, my transformer silent after decades of continuous humming. The stillness was profound, the absence of electricity through my systems creating a kind of peace I'd never experienced during my years of operation. I was finally, truly at rest. But I don't feel sad. I don't feel the loss that might be expected. I fulfilled my purpose. I was exactly what I was designed to be, and I did it well. I brought entertainment and joy and connection into people's lives. I was there for important moments and mundane ones, treating each with equal faithfulness. I was good television. Sometimes, late at night in the quiet basement, I imagine I can still feel the electromagnetic hum of the house around me, the other electronics operating, the electricity flowing through walls, the general aliveness of a modern home. I imagine I can still feel the warmth of my own operation, the heat rising from my circuits, the glow of my phosphors, the sweep of electron beams painting pictures 60 times per second. I imagine I can still see your face, young and old, child and teenager and adult, always illuminated by my particular blue glow, always focused on whatever world I was showing you, always present in the moment we shared. Those moments were real. They mattered. And nothing, not obsolescence, not age, not the silence of retirement, can take those away. The room is dark now. The basement is quiet. The other televisions on the shelf stand silent beside me, all of us veterans of the analog age, all of us resting after long service. Outside, in the world we can no longer see, technology continues its relentless evolution. Displays getting thinner and sharper and brighter, always moving forward, always improving. But we were there when it mattered. We were the light in dark rooms. We were the voices that filled silence. We were the windows that showed other worlds. We were the constant companions through changing times. We were the TVs, and for a while, for a beautiful while, we were exactly what the world needed. So rest now, if you're listening. Let the hum of memory be your lullaby. Let the blue glow of past moments light your dreams. Let the stories we shared together be your comfort in the darkness. I was a television. I displayed images and played sound. But I was also witness to a life, participant in growing up, keeper of countless small moments that together made up the texture of real existence. And now, like all things, I sleep. The warm, gentle, final sleep of a job completed, a purpose fulfilled, a life well lived in my own electronic way. The screen is dark, the hum has faded, the glow has gone, but the memories remain, phosphor bright and permanent, playing endlessly in the space between then and now, between digital and analog, between the warm glass box in the corner and the infinite present moment where all those hours still exist, perfect and preserved. Good night, sleep well, and thank you for letting me be part of your story, for those years when I was the brightest thing in the house, for the simple gift of being remembered. The power button clicks one final time, and everything fades, gently, peacefully, to black.